Hi Reddit, I'm a bit shaken and upset from what happened and could use some cheering up and practical advice to get back on my feet. During my 30 years of conscious life, I've noticed that my older brother, George, 31M, has always been the golden child of our family. He always got more than me. George knew he was the obvious favorite, which is why he developed a superiority complex. No matter what he did to me, my parents would only punish me. It was clear they cared for him a lot more because he got the lion's share of everything, unless people like my grandparents and relatives called them out on it. This is why my parents packed us up and moved us about 150 miles away from our relatives so they could only see us on holidays. My brother was physically abusive towards me while we were growing up, and my parents did nothing to stop it. My father even said this is how brothers behave with each other and that I should toughen up. When I got my first girlfriend, George flirted relentlessly with her to the point she got extremely uncomfortable and broke up with me. I had a huge fight with him about this and complained to my parents, but they just laughed it off, saying I was being childish. My parents would take him on more vacations while I was left with my grandparents, giving me excuses like they couldn't afford another ticket and would take me some other time. I didn't mind being around my grandparents because I loved them. George would get whatever he wanted, no matter how expensive it was. When I was 16, I got my driver's license even though my brother, who was a year older, kept failing his driving tests. I was working a part-time job at McDonald's, so I asked my parents if they could help buy me a second-hand car, and I would pay them back over the years, but they refused. When George finally got his driving license, they immediately bought him a car. I was so shocked and tried to talk to my parents about it, but they said he needed it more than me. When my 18th birthday came, my parents agreed, after much pleading, that they would buy a car for me. When George heard that, he suddenly decided his car was old and he wanted a new one. My parents decided to give me George's old car and buy him a new one. Even though I felt dejected, I accepted it because at least I had a car to drive to work. I only got equal treatment when my parents had to keep up appearances in front of the rest of the family during their visits. It was rather funny to see the looks on their faces whenever they had to treat me equally to my brother on birthdays and Christmas because other people were present. We had relatives who were very nosy and loved gossiping drama, so my parents did their best to hide their favoritism and threatened me to keep my mouth shut in front of others. Otherwise, they would take away all my stuff. When my older brother graduated high school, my parents were beside themselves with joy. They showered him with praise, expressing how proud they were of his achievements, and even organized a celebration for him. But when it was time for my high school graduation, my mother was late to arrive even though she had been at home all along, and my father never even bothered coming. That night during dinner, when I was sulking over their lack of enthusiasm and appreciation for me, they told me that high school graduation wasn't such a big deal and I should get over it. George, who was in university at the time, sent me a message saying I could never measure up to him and that I should know by now that my parents didn't love me anyway. I remember crying myself to sleep that night. I realized that I could never make my parents love me no matter how much I tried. This was the last straw, and I moved out. If anything, it just made my parents celebrate more because it meant they no longer had to provide for me. From that point on, I would usually only see my parents and brother on holidays like the rest of the family. At the time, I was working full-time and attending college with the help of scholarships that my parents did not pay for. They didn't even show up for my college graduation, saying it would take too much time to drive and visit me, but I didn't care. Ever since I graduated, I got hired at a nice company in my hometown that paid really well. George, on the other hand, dropped out of university because of his drinking problems. During this time, he started day trading with the money my parents gave him every month. He made some money and bragged to everyone, but then he had a major loss and lost everything. Despite this, my parents told him it was just a learning curve and encouraged him to find a stable job. He jumped from one job to another and finally landed a full-time position that paid much less than mine. George and I barely spoke, but whenever we met during Christmas, he would subtly remind me of his perceived superiority. He tried to imply that his choices were better than mine, even though his lower-paying job and tumultuous personal life contradicted the facade he tried to uphold. I didn't mind his taunts because my well-paid salary spoke for itself. Now, coming to the story, my father owns a small manufacturing firm he started about 5 years ago. His manager left suddenly after getting an offer from a competing company. My parents were worried since my father was getting old and couldn't oversee everything on his own. He didn't want to hire someone new and risk them leaving again in a few years. So my father invited both me and George for lunch, a rare occasion for the three of us to sit together. I was surprised my father had personally requested me to be there. As we sat around the table, my father got straight to the point. The family business was on shaky ground, and he needed our help. He explained that the manager had left, and he had been struggling to find a replacement. With the business facing tough times and bankruptcy looming, my father was desperate. He looked at both of us with a plea in his eyes. I kept quiet, because even though I would have happily decided to help, I knew he mostly wanted George's help. I waited for George to speak. To my surprise, George immediately dismissed the idea. He scoffed at working in a small family business and claimed he wasn't interested. His lack of concern for our parents' livelihood was apparent, and it was clear he saw their business as beneath him. My father kept requesting him again and again, but George told him he couldn't risk leaving his job to work for the family when it could all amount to nothing. I could see how hurt my father was hearing this. It was shocking for me, too, since I thought George would jump at the opportunity, given how much my parents favored him. My father, growing increasingly anxious, turned to me with hope in his eyes. He told me he really needed my help and couldn't bear closing down his business. I earned quite well, and because I lived alone, I had considerable savings, which I knew could help my parents out. I know it sounds foolish, but after a moment of contemplation, I decided to step up and accept the challenge. Despite the years of mistreatment and neglect, I couldn't bear to see my father's business crumble. I agreed to help, intending to turn the struggling business around. I even offered to use my savings to fund the family business and help it grow and expand. My parents were extremely grateful and thanked me profusely. Fast forward 5 years, and I have poured my sweat and soul into this company. I've established better relationships with our customers and improved our company image and reputation. I set up our website to grow internationally, brought our non-existent documentation into order, and established a company quality system close to ISO 9001. I improved production quality control and testing processes, reducing defects in manufacturing. I even helped our employees with packing, cleaning, and carrying heavy boxes when they were busy or when I had free time. Throughout all of this, my father did almost nothing. He hardly understood technology and would only oversee major orders. I was basically the only one handling everything. As the business thrived under my management, my parents began to acknowledge my capabilities. I was confident that eventually I would take over the family business. I didn't mind splitting it with my brother if he ever showed any interest. My relationship with my parents had improved considerably during this time. They didn't blatantly favor me like they had favored George, but they did respect me more. My grandparents were also happy to see how I was being treated like a son by my parents for the first time. 3 years ago, George came to our parents to announce he was getting married. Everyone was shocked, since we didn't even know he had a serious girlfriend. It turned out he had met Donna just a month ago, and they wanted a shotgun wedding. This was a huge red flag for me since they hardly knew each other. I told my brother about my concerns, but he scoffed, telling me to keep my nose out of his business and not to act smart just because I earned more than him. After that, I stayed out of his life. When George got married, everything changed. My parents were the first ones to be cut off by Donna because she found them too overwhelming and didn't like how they fawned over George. He stopped calling or texting back, and I knew how sad it made my mother to not be able to talk to her favorite son. I had no idea what happened with George for those 2 years, but last year, out of nowhere, he suddenly came back home after years of no contact. I didn't know he had come back home until the next day. When my father didn't show up for a very important meeting, I called him, and he informed me that George was back for good. I was taken aback. My dad asked me to come to their place for family dinner as he had something important to talk to me about. There, I was told that George's wife, Donna, had cheated on him and left him for another man. I was not surprised to hear this since Donna did earn more than him, and knowing my brother, I knew he couldn't hold down a job for long. My parents happily informed me that George was back for good since he was getting a divorce. Later in the evening, my father called me and George to his study. Imagine how I felt when my father closed the door, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Start looking for a job. Your services are no longer needed. From tomorrow, your brother will be taking over your position." Stared at him dumbfounded, waiting for an explanation. Instead, my brother told me he was finally ready to take over the family business and would be working with Dad. My father nodded and said that this was why he didn't need me anymore. I sat there feeling confused, unable to comprehend how easily my dad was removing me from his business when I had quit my job and invested all my savings to help him. I looked at my dad and asked why my brother and I couldn't work together since this was a family business. I deserved to keep my position after expanding the company so much, and my brother could start from the bottom to learn the ropes. George scoffed indignantly, saying I was just a placeholder for him and that the business was always going to be his, so should stop being immature. I argued with my father about how I had turned our losses into profits and that he couldn't just do this to me. But my father firmly reminded me that I was an employee like everyone else, and he had every right to fire me. He said he didn't want to embarrass me by making me serve a notice period, so he wanted the change to be immediate. I asked if my mother knew about this, hoping she might convince him otherwise, but he nodded, saying she had wanted this all along so George could stay with them forever. I was devastated. It was clear they had used me when they needed and were now discarding me once their favorite child was back. I calmly told my father he needed to pay me back all the savings I had invested in the business so I could start fresh. My father and brother got pissed. My brother asked how dare I ask for my money back when our parents had spent so much on me during my childhood. My dad agreed, saying it was my choice to invest and I should feel ashamed for asking for it back. My brother called me ungrateful. Hearing this, I lost it. I screamed at him, "You have no idea what I went through growing up under your shadow, enduring your constant abuse and our parents' blatant favoritism. I've worked tirelessly to save this family business from bankruptcy, and now you think it's unfair for me to ask for what's rightfully mine." My father's face twisted with anger. He declared, "You think you deserve money? Your brother is right. You are ungrateful, and I won't give you a single penny. I will also remove you from the inheritance because of how greedy you are. Now get out of this house." The weight of his words hit me like a sledgehammer. For the first time in a long time, I felt my heart break because of how my family had always treated me. The dream of inheriting the family business and receiving what I believed was rightfully mine shattered before me. My father's anger was palpable, and the denial of both the business and the inheritance felt like a cruel betrayal. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I told my dad, "Okay, if that's what you want, I'll go my own way. You can keep your business and money. I'll start from scratch and build my success. One day you'll see you made a mistake." I didn't stick around for their response. Filled with more negativity, I just walked out of the house. After that day, they never reached out to me again. My grandparents eventually found out about George taking over the business and how my family had kicked me out. They reprimanded my parents, but it was too late by then. It's been 6 months since I left the family business and stopped all contact with my family. Facing the days that followed was tough. I had to come to terms with the reality of starting over. It hurt knowing my family didn't want me, but it fueled a determination to succeed on my own. Finding a job seemed challenging at first. I hadn't worked a regular job for a long time, but managing our family business showed me how good I was at it. Then a bright idea struck me. I decided to approach companies in direct competition with ours, highlighting my skills and experience in successfully managing and turning around my family business. Surprisingly, a couple of companies were interested in what I had to offer. After several interviews, one of them offered me a job. It was a fresh start, and I was eager to prove myself in a new environment. The new job was challenging, but I tackled each task with the same determination I had used to save my family business. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life and regain the confidence shattered by my family's rejection. As the months passed, I found stability in my professional life and personal well-being. The absence of toxic family dynamics allowed me to thrive and discover my true potential. Everything was starting to go well when, last week, out of nowhere, my parents contacted me. I ignored their calls at first, but they kept calling and sending multiple text messages. Eventually, I decided to answer, curious about what they wanted after 6 months of silence. My parents' voices sounded anxious over the phone. They asked if I could help them pay their bills this month because their electricity had been cut off. I was taken aback by their sudden demand. "No, how are you?" Or, "It's been a long time." Just straightforward asking me to pay their bills. I calmly told them to ask their successful son to pay and not to disturb me again. Hearing this, my mother started crying and then revealed that the family business was now in serious financial trouble and on the verge of bankruptcy. My father explained that they desperately needed my help. It turns out my parents had lost everything thanks to the golden boy, who used nearly 90% of their savings and retirement funds investing in crypto and day trading. He convinced them to invest it all in crypto at the beginning of the year, promising their money would triple. But one market crash later, and it was all gone. George was also failing miserably in the family business, and all the workers hated him. He clearly had no idea how to manage, which was no surprise, and the business had lost a lot of contracts and major clients. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the irony. After years of mistreatment, my parents had the audacity to expect me to rescue them. I told them I would not forget how they kicked me out of the family business and inheritance, so they should forget calling me ever again. My parents tried to argue, saying I owed them for everything they had done for me during my childhood and that I should be a better son. I was getting so pissed at their audacity that I took a moment to collect myself and calmly reminded them of the years of favoritism, mistreatment, and the savings I had invested in their business, which they had never paid me back for. I pointed out how I had turned their struggling business into a thriving one, all the while being treated as a mere employee. I warned them that if they ever contacted me again, I would take them to court to force them to pay me back my savings and sell their house if necessary. The conversation quickly turned into a heated argument, but I stood my ground and firmly told them that I wouldn't be coming to their aid, no matter how much they cried about it. It felt liberating to finally stand up for myself and reject their demands. Since then, I have received messages and calls from them, my brother, and other relatives saying how I should help them out and that I'm being too cruel. Only my grandparents, with whom I stayed as a child while my parents went on vacation, have stood by my side, knowing how my parents have behaved with me over the years. Am I the asshole for refusing to help my family out now that they have lost everything thanks to their golden boy? Update 1. I wanted to express my heartfelt gratitude for the overwhelming support and encouragement I have received from this community. Your words have been a source of strength during this challenging time, and I appreciate every comment and message that has come my way. It means more to me than I can express. My relatives found out about this because my parents reached out to one of their cousins for help when I refused. Instead of telling them the entire story about how my brother was behind the business going bankrupt, they told him how my brother was trying to support them during a tough time while I had blatantly refused to pay their bills. They lied, knowing I would be blamed by everyone, just to avoid embarrassing my brother. I agree with everyone that I should not keep my mouth shut anymore. What my parents have done to me cannot be forgiven or forgotten. After taking some time to reflect on the situation and discussing it with my grandparents, who have been a consistent source of support throughout my life, I have decided to clarify things with my extended family. This weekend, I plan to address the years of mistreatment, the unjust removal from the family business, and the financial investment I made in my parents' struggling enterprise that was never acknowledged. It's time to set the record straight and make my side of the story known. I will update you once I have informed everyone. Update 2. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to address all my relatives' misconceptions, and I did just that this morning by sending a mass email to everyone who had messaged or called me to ask why I wasn't helping my parents out. In the email, I shed light on the years of suffering I endured under my parents' roof, detailing the mistreatment, blatant favoritism, and unfair expulsion from the family business and inheritance when their golden child returned. I wrote exactly how much savings I had invested in the family business and how my parents kicked me out without paying a penny back to me. It was crucial for me to clarify the reasons behind my decisions and ensure that everyone understood the reality of my experiences. After sending the email, I felt much lighter because now everyone knows my side of the story. I don't know if my relatives will believe me, but regardless of what they choose to believe, I just wanted to speak my truth. Update 3. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some positive developments in my life. Following the mass email, some relatives reached out to apologize, expressing their shock and sympathy for the years of mistreatment I had endured. They had no idea about it, and it was validating to hear their understanding and support. These relatives also took it upon themselves to reprimand my parents for their actions. Although I don't know exactly what they said, my parents and brother tried to reach out to me multiple times, even sending messages about how childish and immature I was for talking about family matters to others. I decided to send them a final message saying I was done with them and that I didn't care if they ended up on the streets. I warned them again not to contact me and threatened legal action if they persisted. I blocked them after that, and surprisingly, they haven't contacted me further. On a personal note, my job and life are going well, and I've recently started therapy to help process and navigate the lingering effects of my past experiences. It's a journey of healing, and I'm grateful for the support I found in various aspects of my life. I visit my grandparents whenever my work schedule allows, and they are the only family I acknowledge and ever need. Thank you all for being a part of this ongoing chapter in my life. Every one of your encouraging messages has played a significant role in my journey toward reclaiming